Hello again. Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about Reiki. I mentioned it in my last talk on timelines, and it's something that I do every day. And I offer Reiki sessions to people, and I also teach Reiki classes. And, when you go through a Reiki class, then you have Reiki in your field, your biofield, your aura field. Um, and so you're always in Reiki, bringing Reiki wherever you are. Um, and I just wanted to, I think Reiki is a big part of my spiritual path, even though I always talk about A Course in Miracles. I, um, I want to also acknowledge that Reiki has been huge as well, and other ways that the communication has occurred from what the Course would call the Holy Spirit. And you know, I've had I've I've had a lot of phases or chapters in my life with the Course in Miracles, and I just want to mention that I can already hear, if somebody listens who's a, you know, you know, uh, coming from a particular perspective with the Course in Miracles, they're just going to call Reiki and everything else magic, and that's fine because everything is magic. It doesn't make it wrong or bad, and it doesn't make it not helpful. And even the Course in Miracles is magic, and so is breathing. So, so I just wanted to put that out there for the Course in Miracles group who might be tuning in. Not that I expect there would be too many, but maybe you never know. And if you are one of those people and you've been interested in Reiki, but you've been feeling, or maybe something else that's kind of considered woo-woo, and you are a little bit shy, or you feel like maybe that's taboo because that's magic, because you're a Course in Miracles person and you learn that, and um, you know, if this helps give you permission to follow your heart and to follow what you want to discover, what you want to explore for yourself, I I'm really happy. I want to give you a lot of permission to follow your heart. I tell people follow your nose. And it's led me many different places, but I think the Course in Miracles, which is just a book, remember, it's just words and they are pointing to something. They are not intended to be taken as the Ten Commandments. They are undoing something in us, and they are also meeting us where we are, and that where we are is changing all the time. So the meaning that we're getting from it is changing all the time. So let it grow inside of you. Let your relationship to it evolve naturally, um, if you want. If you want. You may find that the way that you relate to it changes from decade to decade, like I did. But the reason I like Reiki and how I feel it works in tandem with something like the Course in Miracles is that Reiki feels it is a feeling, it is an energy that people sense. If not right away, then ultimately at some point they sense it if they keep going because they become more sensitive. So whereas a lot of spiritual teachings that we read can can absolutely work and feel very helpful. There's a way in which Reiki is more immediate in relaxing the system. By relaxing the system, it's dealing with the nervous system, with what we identify as is the body, so that we can take in these deeper ideas easier. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think as you follow a non-dual path like A Course in Miracles, which is really a disruptive path, right? It's a path of disrupting your identity, your relationship to who you are and your reality, because that's false, it says. So it's not all rainbows and unicorns and, um, there's a lot of pain in the path as blocks need to be seen for what they are so they can be relinquished. But as they are relinquished, a lot of times at the same time, because it's related, the outer is also dissolving. And so structures we've been clinging to in a codependent kind of way that were created out of fear, they start to erode. And so it can be very disorienting. But so I say, lean into whatever works. And I'm magic agnostic, path agnostic. And Reiki is one of those tools that works for a lot of people, certainly works for me. And how I think of it is as this as this divine intervention of A Course in Miracles, which is really just a word for a frequency or a love, a knowing, a consciousness that's coming into my consciousness and interrupting my old patterns, right? So it's requiring that I stop relating to my inner condition in the same way that I always have in a asleep, unconscious way. One of the first lessons is these thoughts don't mean anything. I see only the past. I'm never upset for the reason I think. I'm under no rules but God's. I could choose peace, but instead of this, dif- uh, uh, oh, I don't have to keep going on. But anyway, there's all these kind of in your face, very direct corrections that if you take them into your heart and if you try to apply them, you find how disruptive they are to your normal patterns, which is exactly what they're supposed to do. Um, so that we wake up from the one that we're not and find that God is already here, that heaven is already here. This state of consciousness has always been here. We're just blocking it. So as that disruption happens, sometimes something like Reiki can be really helpful to keep us from uh, getting lost in the chaos of the coming apart process. It helps soothe. It also helps rinse. I think of Reiki often as a rinse cycle. So as I'm practicing my meditation or my daily lessons from the workbook, or if I'm following Eckhart Tolle, or if I'm doing Byron Katie's The Work Process, and things are, coming undone in me and coming apart, and I'm having new experiences and I'm feeling a little disoriented, one of the things that can, help is to use a practice like Reiki to um, help break up the blocks that are kind of coming up to the surface so that our own life force can flow more freely, so that our own intelligence can reach us in a deeper, more immediate way, our higher consciousness. And what I find with myself and with other people is if they keep coming to Reiki, they're almost always led to some kind of a path, maybe a formal path or maybe just new ways of thinking. Maybe, they're making it up for themselves, things that I'll no longer, indulge in myself, things that I will no longer um, fixate on, you know. So that's a legitimate path that is a pathless path, maybe, or a path with no book or no spokesperson. So that's why I also trust Reiki, because I've noticed that um, it's clearing the way for people's own innate guru to come forward. And that's what I like to tell my clients is that, we're all ultimately our own gurus, and all the energies that are um, fear-based and ego-based, they have to be seen. They have to come home to us and be enlightened. There's no one else who can enlighten those for us. We have to welcome them because they're actually who we are, separated off from ourselves. That's how I think of it. So we have these fractured aspects of our energy, of our beingness, and we need to lean into, as I continue to say, lean into the process of meeting them from a new consciousness that allows them to express if they need to, and then to kind of dissolve into the light of you. And that happens easier when we are taking care of ourselves with something like Reiki, but it's not required. There's plenty of people who have been and teachers and masters who didn't have the word Reiki, but I think they all have had something that it is at its essence what Reiki is. And that's the other thing. Reiki is a particular, word and lineage and history around certain players that started in Japan in the 1920s, and yet it has to be universal. It has to be something that has appeared in many different forms and traditions. And so if we couldn't use, sometimes I ask, if we couldn't use the word Reiki, what would we call it? Would we call it angelic, frequencies? Would we call it just the Holy Spirit? And I don't need an answer for that question. Those questions are best allowed to kind of ring out in you and then let all the answers come and cling to none of them, I think. And it'll just continue to deepen and deepen in you until the no answer happens. So Reiki supports, for me, a path that you're already on, or it can be your own path, as William Rand, who's one of my teachers, says. Reiki can be your path, especially I think Holy Fire, because I see that as being a very profoundly wide and deep frequency of love that's more available to us now because of where we are now. So it can be your path. You can turn to it for guidance. You can use it in many different ways. There's different tools in Reiki that you can use. Or it can synthesize with all the things you already practice. It can complement them and empower them. So one of the things that I've noticed about people who come to Reiki is they get wiser in between sessions, and that's because their own wisdom is being unblocked. And sometimes, occasionally, not often, too much gets unblocked and then they get scared and they go away for a while. And that's okay too. And but if we just stick with it, the power of transformation that happens is really profound, and I've seen people's lives completely change. That's what the fun thing about being where I am now in my practice is that it's been 6 years, and so not only do I have my own life to reflect back on, I have the lives of certain other individuals that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with on a long-term basis to see their transformation. They may have come from a very fundamentalist Christian background, and so part of what's happened with their Reiki journey is they've rinsed that background so that only what serves them for their highest good today and brings them more into peace and out of the division and out of the fear remains, and then is complemented by Reiki. Or they may come from no spiritual path, and they may just have their own ways of thinking and feeling and operating in their lives that are much wiser. Or they may have some other path. Or, you know, yeah, I get those are probably the most common categories. And in the process of that, maybe they go through a lot of life transformation. Maybe the externals of their lives have transformed in a big way, like they have several times for me as I dissolve blocks, you know. But Reiki helps us go through those in with grace, you know. And I like to say Reiki helps us skip across the pond and not get sucked into the undertow. So as we go across the things, the experiences and the upheavals, and as this darker, lower energy comes up that we're all harboring and we've invested in for so long, it has a lot of life seemingly in it. As this stuff comes up and Reiki helps us meet it in a new way, it can be so much quicker to cross that, you know, that gap that we're in, cross the gap, get to the other shore. And in the old days, I would tend to see and experience and feel a lot of stuff and then kind of get sucked into this undertow. And I called it, then I'd be stuck in a cul-de-sac for a really long time going around and around. And it's not like that anymore. And, you know, it's kind of a chicken egg thing. Is it my consciousness that's changed and now Reiki could come reflect that? Or has Reiki helped create that new speed and agility uh, and frequency and courage and all of that? Yes, I think the answer is yes to both of those. I don't think we can parse out the chicken and the egg. No one has ever been able to do it. It doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, if it's all a dream, then, you know, like the Course in Miracles would say, and also the Buddhists would say, it's an illusion or Maya or whatever. Arguing about which came first is not very helpful or important. It's more like being authentic in the life that you're showing up in. You know, that's for me what's important. And so that's kind of Reiki. It's helping us dissolve those energies and those blocks. But in tandem with that, I do think that we need to be willing to meet those and own them. And so that's where I think a high spiritual teaching is really important, you know, or at least it has been for me, and I know for other people, because without that, um, it may be a lot longer of a process for me to begin to disidentify with all the thoughts and all the attitudes and all the tendencies that I have had as a human that need to be released and enlightened, basically. So I could be doing Reiki every day, but if I'm not also following my new prompts, and maybe these paths are sort of making those prompts more conscious, you know, maybe the prompt is to not fear, but these other paths are giving me an alternative why I shouldn't fear, you know, how to put it in a framework of a way of you know, having a new strategy for living, basically, a new a new what is all of this about paradigm that I can use as a scaffold to undo and live differently. And ultimately, I think, yes, all the scaffolds and all the paradigms are all, ultimately they're all false in a way. It's like they're all tools. And then at the end of the day, the tools aren't it either. As Ramana Maharshi said, his teaching was, who am I? And to continue to question who's suffering, and get underneath the identity that I thought I was. But then he'd say, but that's a stick to stir the fire. Who am I as a stick to stir the fire? But then you throw in the stick at the end too. So, we can think of all of the things that I'm talking about as the stick. And then it doesn't matter. If the stick is working in the moment for you, then keep using it. And because it's just a stick. So we don't need to fight over our sticks. Whose stick is better? Reiki doesn't require the practitioner to use their psychic abilities and to diagnose and I think that's very key. It was important to me when I found it because I had had a very bad experience with a very, seemingly powerful spiritual community that was full of psychologists and psychiatrists and all kinds of therapists and doctors and this, that, and the other thing. And being on the other side of the energy of that group that was very grounded in their own belief in, the evil of the world and the need to be the spiritual warrior and, take the power, the light, and, defend the world against the darkness, all of that. And part of that was the healings that they would do with their psychic gifts and how they would validate their findings with each other's psychic gifts. That was a very powerful and very painful chapter that taught me a lot that I didn't know I needed to learn about what healing isn't and what awakening isn't. And so, in my classes, I try to strike a balance in my teaching around psychic ability because they do, our abilities and gifts do open up as we grow and heal and expand, and Reiki helps with that process. And we find Reiki can really help us open up to new sensory perception. However, that's not what's doing the healing. And so to be tuned into how do I feel is the most important part of being a healer, and to also honor that the most important part of my capacity as a healer is, am I focused on my own healing? And so if I'm really in my own lane, I always call it that, because I just see us in, like at a public pool, and you go and you're doing your laps and you've got your ropes next to you and you don't start swimming in somebody else's lane. It's just not cool. So you stay in your own lane, you stay in your own truth, in your own listening and following for yourself. And then something that is healing for someone else may come. But if you are feeling off, then it's for you. There's something resonant in you that you need to release is the safest way to hold all that from my perspective. So knowing the Reiki is coming from a non-dual perspective, a non-dual dimension, doing a pattern interrupt at the lower dimension that we are experiencing as our reality and our identity here. I know that it's always safe, that it never imposes, that it honors free will, that it can only do good, and it can never do harm. It flows like water, And that's how we're to become, to be in uh, that flow with the yes. One time, my son, when he was little, he said, "Flow with the go instead of go with the flow." So I always think of flow with the go. And when there's no go, don't flow. Just go around and stay in your flow, and honor the wisdom in the other, because that is you. And so that's what I love about Reiki. It helps me stay in that place with other people, to remember who they really are and the truth of who they are. And that is a remembrance of my own truth. And as I hold on to that, as Reiki helps me do that and tunes me into this deep seeing, then there's some healing happening, and it's mutual. And I may not ever know exactly what happens. I just know that it's maximal. And oftentimes I get to hear about it, and that's great. Um, but it's ultimately none of my business. So, what else do I want to say about Reiki? Well, the primer on Reiki is it's a Japanese energy healing technique. So I forgot to say the most obvious things. It's often considered a universal energy, but I don't like that in the sense that it sounds like it's universal electricity and you just plug it in and now you power up your light and you're kind of in control of this new commodity, free energy. So it is kind of like that, but I like to think of it much more as an intelligence, and that feels more honoring. That it is mastering me as a Reiki master. It's the other way around. I'm not mastering Reiki. So for me, in my way of thinking with the Course in Miracles background, it's another way the Holy Spirit shows up in my life, and that's all I need to say probably on the connection for me of Reiki and the Holy Spirit and A Course in Miracles. It's been given to me as another form, just like the workbook, um, or the text, or the teacher's manual, or the psychotherapy manual, and it's very in alignment with how I see the truth teachings in that text, and also with Joel Goldsmith's work, who was a mystic in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. He died in 1964, right before A Course in Miracles began to be written down by Helen Schuckman. He died, and some think he was kind of the precursor to A Course in Miracles. Many of his teachings, which he called the infinite way, are very much in alignment with A Course in Miracles. And it's this in the most simple form. The punchline is, again, God is. And you can find that no matter where you go, if you go to the highest teaching um, of that path up the mountain. So whether you're looking at Advaita, Vedanta, or Buddhism, the highest teachings, or the mystics, the Christian mystics, um, whatever, you know, tradition. I'm sure there's indigenous analogies as well, and I just don't know everything about all the different paths. But the highest truth that each path leads to has to be very comparable to all the other highest truths, right? The truth is the truth is the truth. We just have different lenses and different ways of making our way up that ladder or up that mountain. Okay, well, that's my little talk on Reiki. I hope it made some sense. Maybe I'll just say what it feels like for most people. It morphs as you deepen, I think, in your practice of Reiki or receiving Reiki. sometimes people have a first session and they don't feel much during the session, but they are very relaxed and maybe they really are tired when they're done. And that's a sign of a deep healing that's happened. If they're tired and need to go home and take a nap, it's because some very deep energies have been sort of released for them. Um, Most everyone will feel like I feel more like myself again, like they're grounded in their body and something that was fear energy or sort of incoherent frequencies has been released or made coherent, and they feel more at home in their own self. Um, and then if they continue to come, they begin to feel more gradually because they are becoming more sensitive. And they're also developing a trust with Reiki. So there's sort of this rapport on an unconscious level that our systems begin to open deeper and wider and more fully to this love, basically, energy as we trust it, like we would in any relationship. And then sometimes we can have a deep session or a class, and then something got surfaced that we need to process a bit. And that can happen in a Reiki class occasionally. So I always offer my own services and comfort to my students should they ever need it. Because if they feel a real dramatic kind of bout of fear or self-doubt after a class, that's because something that was in there has now come up to the surface more. And it's a good thing. It's for healing. And Reiki will help that. And it's also good to join during that process with somebody who will kind of hold that high consciousness through Reiki or whatever, and not reinforce it by, our good intentions used to be, oh, you poor thing, or, oh, yes, that's horrible. And that might not be the most helpful thing in that moment. We may need to let it express through us to someone who we trust without them going into it with us, identifying with it like we are, and just giving the space, giving us full permission to feel what we're feeling, and in an unconditional, loving way. And that can be really helpful as the fast track for getting through those big things that come up. So some people, where they are in life, they know it's working for them, and so they come to Reiki on a regular basis. And some people know that they just need their tune-up, when they need it, maybe monthly or something like that. And then some people just come when they have the feeling that everything is getting too hard, and nothing else is working. Maybe uh, they've already been to therapy and they've already been to, tried different things. And so Reiki is something that they have hopes will make a difference where nothing else has. And it can be very good as a complement to therapy. I would never say replace your therapy. There's a place for that, absolutely. But often people may find that just talking doesn't change how they feel. So maybe after getting the clarification and the clarity from a conceptual place, it's helpful, next to somehow move the energy. And Reiki is just one of those ways you can do that. So it kind of bridges really our traditional our traditional therapies and also our spiritual paths. It complements both, I guess is what I'm saying in this talk. Finally, I got to my point. I don't script these, as you can tell, probably. And sometimes I need to kind of let this energy free and see what it has to say, how it's going to self-organize. And I'll sit with the talk for a while before I put it public and make sure that I think it actually had a coherent message that will be helpful. And I'll probably sit with this for a day or two, and then maybe it'll post, and maybe I'll just put it away and we'll come back to the subject later. That's how I how I've been doing it. So please, I love the comments. If you have any questions, I might unhide my former podcast episodes um, on these topics. I called it Divine Interventions. The reason, by the way, that I stopped doing that podcast is I felt that the setup for it, I had painted myself into a corner and I wanted to kind of liberate myself. And so this awakening life, I feel, is much broader the way that I hold it compared to how I held the other one. And I think I'm just changing very rapidly. And so the other one just didn't seem like me anymore. So I'll see. I might open them up and I might not. We'll see. Um, but if you have thoughts of your own, I'd love to hear them. If you have topics that you're interested in or that you want to share on, that you've seen people share on that you want me to see, I'm interested in everything. So, um, oh, I'll just say one more thing. That is that on the 30th of this month, July 2025, July 20th, it's a Wednesday, I'll be doing a Zoom Reiki experience that's open to everyone. It's free. And I used to do these when I first started back to Reiki with Holy Fire in 2019. I quit my work with hospice at the end of that year and felt guided to go full time into Reiki. And I got my office in March, and then we promptly went into shelter in place with the pandemic. And so it was very ironic. That's a whole other story of how I had this self-doubt, like I had really followed the wrong guidance, like, and yet I'll tell you later, but no, it was absolutely the right thing. But anyway, one of the things that I did because of the pandemic was I was doing regular free events. And I just have decided to bring those back. At least we'll try it this time. And I'm going to be in Mount Shasta in California with my son. We're going to take a 4-day little vacation from Reno. And so I'm going to do it from Mount Shasta. So that's kind of fun because it's a special place with a special energy field, you could call it. And you're welcome to be part of it. I'll put the link below. It's Zoom. You can have cameras on, cameras off. It'll be a group experience plus a little talk and kind of give you a taste of Reiki if you haven't had it yet. All right. Well, I think that's what I want to say. And thank you for listening. And I'll talk to you next time.